Hello everybody and welcome to this complete Python 3 hacking course. Now in this course we're going to code multiple projects, each one of them will have its own purpose and you will have all of the code at the end of each project in the resources list to download. And by the end of this course you should have a pretty good knowledge on how to create tools using Python 3 for your own penetration tests. So as I mentioned, this will gather different tools from different fields, such as for example port scanners, backdoors, email scrappers, vulnerability scanners, and many more. I'm going to code as we go and explain everything line by line, so you should have no problem understanding the code. And just in case you don't like to code along, you will have all of the programs available to download at the end of each project. You can simply just download the code and follow along the tutorials as I explain without having to code anything. Okay? Now, one important thing is if you have any regarding any program or if you have any proposals and you want me to add something to the course, feel free to post in the Q&A section and I will respond as soon as I can. Also, if you don't understand anything, make sure that you post in the Q&A section or send me a private message and I will also respond there as well. Another thing to mention is that throughout the course there will be different articles and bonus lectures which will give you additional knowledge, and for example if this course doesn't cover something such as for example installing Windows 7 virtual machine, I'll make sure to leave a link to the tutorial where you can watch and follow along the tutorial in order to continue the course. This course will be updated every month with new lectures, with updated code and with your proposals. If you tell me for example you want to see an updated keylogger, I will make sure that I create it and put it inside of a course. Now in this course we are going to use Kali Linux as a virtual machine, and don't worry, I will lead you through the steps of installation in the introductory part of the course. In case you're an advanced ethical hacker, feel free to skip the introductory part and get straight into the coding lessons. For all of you beginners, I will teach you in the introductory video how you can create your own virtual machine and set up your own environment in order to start with this course. Another advice that I have is, in case you don't have too much Python knowledge, feel free to also take a course on the side, as we are not going to cover Python 3. We're going to need it in order to host the Kali Linux machine in which we are going to write our Python code. So let's get straight into how to download it. So all you need to do is go to your Google Chrome or Firefox, whichever search engine you're using, and navigate to the link virtualbox.org. Once you visit this link, it will lead you to this page where it would tell you to download VirtualBox 6.1. Now it doesn't really matter which version you are going to download, they're rather all the same, so you can simply just click on the newest one, which in my case at the moment is 6.1, click on download, and it will lead you to this page where it will ask you for which type of host you want to download the VirtualBox. And right here under the VirtualBox platform packages, you can choose Windows hosts, OS X hosts, Linux distributions and Solaris hosts. Since I'm running Windows 10 environment on my main PC, I'm going to navigate to the Windows hosts, and just like that it should start downloading the VirtualBox installer file onto my machine. As we can see right here, it is not that large of a file, it is 108 megabytes large, so as soon as it downloads, you can simply just run it and install VirtualBox. The process of installation of VirtualBox is rather easy, but I'm still going to guide you through the steps as to how to install VirtualBox. So as we can see right here, there's not much time left. Okay, so here it is. Let's open this up, show in folder. I will paste it onto my desktop right here, and all you need to do is run the file. We get a pop-up window which says preparing to install. And here is the welcome window to the VirtualBox. We want to click next right here. Next here as well. And under the custom setup, you can choose which options you want to leave unchecked and which options you want to uncheck. So for example, I will leave all 4 checked, as I do want start menu entries and I also want shortcut on my desktop, so I'm just going to click on next right here. And this is a warning that usually comes up once you install VirtualBox, which tells you that during the installation of VirtualBox you might actually temporarily disconnect from the internet. Even though that never really happened to me, it might be the best idea in case you're downloading something to actually wait for that to finish before you actually click on the yes to proceed the installation. Since I am not doing anything at the moment, I am simply just going to click here yes and click here on install. And as it says right here, this may take several minutes, usually it is around 2 to 3 minutes. It will ask us for the administrator password. We're going to click here yes, since I don't really have a password to type in, and it should start installing VirtualBox on my machine. Now, you might notice that I already do have VirtualBox, but this is 6.0 version, and this version is actually going to be updated to the newest one, which is 6.1. So I'm just going to wait for this to finish and I will get back to you right away. Okay, so the installation has finished and I'm just going to click right here, finish, and it should automatically start my VirtualBox. And here it is. Now, your window might be a little bit different because I already have some machines installed right here, and you should not see any of these Kali Linux machines or Ubuntu machines, OS machines on your screen. This should all be empty. You should see these buttons right here, which new stands for basically creating a new virtual machine, which we're going to take a look at how to do in the next video. For now on, we successfully installed Oracle VM VirtualBox, and in the next video we're going to see how we can install Kali Linux as our operating system on the virtual machine. Okay, so thank you for watching this tutorial and I will see you in the next lecture. Bye! Welcome back everyone. Since in the previous video we successfully installed VirtualBox, right now we want to see where we can download Kali Linux, which version should we download, and how we can create a virtual machine. Okay, so right now, if you go to your Google Chrome and navigate to the official Kali Linux website, which is the link kali.org/downloads, you should see this page, which will give you the latest version of Kali Linux. In this case, at the current time, this is 2020.1a, and it is the size of 2 GB. Now, as I mentioned, this is the newest version possible, but I will not be using this version in the course. The reason for that is it seems to be a little bit laggy on my PC, but if you want to use the newest version and it works perfectly for you, feel free to download it. It doesn't really matter regarding the course content. So in order to download it, you simply just click on Kali Linux 64-bit and it should start downloading it over HTTP. And you also have the option to download it over torrent if you'd like. Now, for those of you that also do not like the newest version, you can simply just go to another page, which is old.kali.org, which will have all of the previous Kali Linux versions and their release dates, so you can download any version you like. In my case, I will just use the version before the newest one, which is 2019.4. You simply just click on the Kali 2019.4. And it should lead you to this page where you can download the ISO file for the Kali Linux 2019.4 version for 64-bit and 32-bit machine. Okay? So I would simply just download Kali Linux 2019.4 and use this ISO file in order to continue the installation. If you want to use the newest version, well, then you download this Kali Linux 64-bit or Kali Linux 32-bit depending on your machine, but you are most likely going to have a 64-bit machine. So once you click on it, as we can see in just a few seconds, it should start downloading it, but I'm not going to wait for this because I already have the ISO file downloaded, so I will just cancel this installation. I will navigate to my VirtualBox and let's see how we can use the ISO file in combination with VirtualBox to create a Kali Linux virtual machine. Also, you might have noticed that I already have a couple Kali Linux machines installed right here. I'm going to use this one for the actual course, but I will show you how you can proceed with the installation of the newest version since it just came out, and it has some different options during the installation that you might get confused with. So let's cover that as well. You simply just click on the new button, which will create a new virtual machine. It should pop up with this window where it will ask you for the name and operating system. You can name it anything you want. I will name it New Kali. Set the type of the operating system to be Linux and the version to be Debian 64-bit in case you downloaded the 64-bit version of Kali Linux. Now the reason we use Debian is because Kali Linux is Debian based, therefore we choose this option. Click here on next, and here it will ask you for the memory size or the RAM memory that you want to allocate to your virtual machine. I would advise you not to go below the 1 GB of RAM, but you can also go up to the 4, 5, maybe even 8 GB of RAM, depending on your actual machine. Okay, so I will just leave it on 1 GB. We want to leave the option create a virtual hard disk now. Click on create. Also leave it on VirtualBox disk image. Click on next. And we want to set dynamically allocated. Here you allocate the amount of memory you want to give from your hard disk to the virtual machine. And you should not go below 20 GB, especially in the newest version, which allows you to download and install a bunch of different softwares used for ethical hacking. So I'm just going to leave it on 20 GB and click on create. And we can see the new Kali has been added. Now, before we proceed with the installation of the Kali Linux, in the next video, we need to change a few of the settings inside of this machine. So select your machine that you just created, click on settings, and under the storage settings, you want to navigate to the controller IDE, delete this empty part by right-clicking on it and clicking remove attachment. Click on remove, and then you want to click on this circle with a plus. Add the version of Kali Linux that you downloaded. In this case I have the 2019.4 and 2020.1a, and I'm just going to show you for the purpose of this tutorial the 2020.1a. Click on choose. Now another thing that you might want to consider in case you cannot see them right here, you can go onto the add and simply just find the ISO file that you downloaded inside of your PC wherever you saved it. Okay? So let's click on cancel. And also another thing that you want to change is under the network settings, you want to go to the attached to and click on bridged adapter. Also make sure that you leave it on the Ethernet cable connection, since wireless adapters know to actually present problem inside of a Kali Linux, and most of them aren't even supported. Therefore, you might actually have problem connected to the internet if you connect over wireless adapter. That's why it is always the best idea to use Ethernet cable. Okay, so once you finish all of that, click on OK, and your new Kali Linux machine is ready for the installation. So we're going to continue with that in the next video. We're going to pass through all of the steps, and then we are ready to jump into the coding sections of this course. Now keep in mind that even after the installation there are a few things that you should do with Kali Linux. I will make sure to leave all of the links below so we don't waste time explaining the Kali Linux and explaining the command line, and instead we can just focus on the coding parts of the course. Okay, so thank you for watching this tutorial, and I will see you in the next lecture. Bye! Welcome back! In this tutorial we're going to continue with the installation of Kali Linux. So we successfully managed to set up all of the options inside of our VirtualBox, and right now we are ready to start our machine and install the operating system. I'm going to lead you through all of the steps needed to take in order to install Kali Linux, and then in the next video we are ready to start hacking using Python. Okay, so all you need to do right now is click on the start button while you selected your Kali Linux machine. As we can see, this is the first window that we will encounter. Let me just enlarge my screen. It will ask us for different types of options, such as if we want the graphical install or the usual install. It doesn't really matter. We can simply just go with the graphical install and install the Kali Linux like that. Okay, so here is the next option that pops up. It will ask us to select the language. I will leave it on English. The location, it doesn't really matter, I could just leave it on United States. If you like to, you can select your own location. Click on continue. And here it asks us which type of keyboard configuration we want to use. I will leave it on American English. Click on continue. Now while this is installing, another thing I want to mention is another reason why I don't really like the newest version. Because it will ask you to actually have a new user and not use the root account in order to complete your actions inside of the Kali Linux. And that is also another thing why I prefer the older versions, because you can simply just use root account to perform anything you'd like. Now keep in mind that using root account can cause some security breaches, but since we're using a virtual machine, this is just for the learning purposes, it doesn't really matter. That's why I chose the 2019.4 version of Kali Linux, which I find better and more suitable for this course. But right now, here is the next option that pops up, which is the configuration of network. The host name, we can call it test. The domain name, we can simply just delete and leave on empty because we don't really need it at the moment. And here's the option that I talked about. It will ask us to set up users and passwords. And this option didn't exist in the previous versions, only in 2020.1a version, which is the one we're installing at the moment. So you will have to create a new user. In this case, I will just call it test. Username for your account will also be test. And here we choose a password for the new user. Here you can type any password you like. I'm going to type test 1234 and also test 1234 and click on continue. Configuring the clock, I will select Eastern. The partitioning of disks, we want to select the option guided, use entire disk. Select the hard disk that you created during the previous video and click on continue. And here we want to set all files in one partition, as it does even say in the brackets, recommended for new users. Click on continue. Click finish partitioning and write changes to disk. We want to select yes and click on continue. Now this will start the installation, which will get interrupted with maybe 1-2 questions. Keep in mind that this will take some time to actually install, especially the newest version. It did take me around 45 minutes to an hour to actually finish all of the installations. And once it finishes that, you should be ready to use your Kali Linux machine. Now we're just going to leave it right here, and if we get any pop-up question, I'm going to get back to you right away. Okay, so here is the first pop-up question. It is the configuration of the package manager. Here you simply just want to click on continue and leave this blank. Alright, so here is another question, and this is actually the newest feature of the Kali Linux 2020.1a, which allows us to actually install desired tools and not install everything that we might never use. But even though, I would still advise you to actually select everything, or at least select the most important tools for Kali Linux, especially if you plan on using it later on, even after the course. Now, for our course, it really doesn't matter what you select right here, as we are simply just going to use Python 3 during our lectures. So right here, you can use spacebar to select different things, such as Kali desktop environment. You can select everything if you want. It doesn't really matter, just once you select everything that you need, you can click on continue. And this installation right here will take some time. There will be another pop-up question which will ask you something along the lines whether you want to install the grub bootloader to the master boot record, where you want to select yes. And after that, I believe there will be no more pop-ups and you should have the installation complete and your Kali Linux will be ready to use. So that would be about it for this installation tutorial. I will leave some links in the resources of the lecture where you can get familiar with the Kali Linux a little bit more and where you can perform top 10 things that everyone should do after installing Kali Linux. Okay, so that would be about it for this tutorial, and in the next lecture we're finally going to see how we can download and install PyCharm, which we're going to use for creating our programs. Hope I see you there and take care. Bye. Welcome back. Now that we got our Kali Linux set up and ready, all we are left to do before we can start coding is install the PyCharm. Now, what is PyCharm, you might be asking? Well, PyCharm is an integrated development environment used for computer programming, especially aimed for Python programmers. It is also cross-platform, so you can get it for Windows, macOS and Linux systems if you'd like. Now let's see how we can actually download it. First of all, we need to open up our Firefox, and depending on which version of Kali Linux you are running, it might be located on the left side of the screen right here, in case you're using the newest version, And in case you're using the 2019.4 version, like I am, you simply just go to this icon right here, type in Firefox, and click Enter. It will open up the Firefox for you, and then we can navigate to the Google search bar and type PyCharm. Click on the first link that pops up, and then click on Download. You will see that it will automatically realize that we are running Linux systems, and we will get two different versions available for download. We get the professional version and the community version. Now, since the community version is free and open source, we're going to download that one instead of the professional version. In just a few seconds, this pop-up window should come up, and it will ask us whether we want to open the file or save the file. In this case, we want to save the file. Click here on OK. And right here under this arrow, if you click on it, you will see that it has started downloading PyCharm on our Kali Linux machine. Now, while this is downloading, I just want to mention one thing. So I will just lower this, and I will open up the terminal, which is this icon right here. In case you are using the newest version, you will not be a root account inside of the terminal. You will simply just be a user that you created during the installation, which I showed in the previous few videos. If you're using the 2019.4 version like I am, you will not have a problem with root account, as you will simply just be the root account every time you log in, as we can see right here. Now, let me just zoom this in, so we can see everything a little bit better. Okay, so it's good now. Therefore, some of the commands that we run will require root privileges, and I just want to show you how you can run them. For example, let's say the command whoami requires root privileges. Now, it doesn't, but let's say it does. If you're using a simple user account and not a root account, in order to run the whoami command and not get the access denied error, you can simply just type sudo whoami. Now, on the newest version of Kali Linux, it will ask you for the password of your own account. You simply just type it in, and it will execute this command and give you the output. Okay? So I just wanted to mention that in case you run into some errors where you require root privileges in order to run. And now let's see if our download has finished. We have 73 more megabytes left, so I'm just going to wait for this to finish, and then we will proceed with the installation. Okay, so it is finished. We want to click on this icon right here, which will open up the folder where our PyCharm is located. We can close the Firefox as we'll no longer need it. And right here we can see that the PyCharm is located in the /root/downloads directory. Now on the new Kali Linux, it might be the name of your account and then /downloads. So let's navigate inside of our terminal to that directory, /root/downloads. Type ls, and we can see PyCharm is right here. Now you might notice that it has the extension of .tar.gz, which simply just means that this is a packed file and we have to unpack it before we actually run anything from it. In order to unpack this, you simply just type the command tar and then -xzf and then the name of the file. You can simply just type py and then tab in order to autocomplete the name, so you don't have to bother typing all of this by yourself. Press your enter, and in just a few seconds this should be unpacked. Okay, so here it is. Once we type ls once again, now we will have another directory which will be the unpacked PyCharm directory. So let's navigate to there using the cd command, type ls, and we will see a bunch of files and directories inside of this PyCharm directory. We want to go to the bin directory, type ls once again, and inside of this bin directory we want to run this pycharm.sh file. Now you might notice that this is a .sh extension, therefore we need to run it using bash. We simply just type in bash and then pycharm.sh. Now this is another command that might require root privileges in order to run. So in case you are using the newest version of Kali Linux and you are not root account, you simply just type sudo and then bash pycharm.sh. Type in the password and this should execute with no problems. So let's run this. it will run the pycharm.sh program and it should start PyCharm for us. Here it is, we got PyCharm opened up, and before we actually click on create new project, we want to go down here under the configure and click on create desktop entry. We want to check create the entry for all users and click on OK. Once we do that, we can simply just click on create new project, call it test, since this is the test project and we're not going to code anything inside of this project, and it should load up this window right here. It will create the virtual environment for you. It will give you some tips for the programming and also for the PyCharm, which we are not really interested in. And when everything is done and everything is loaded up, we should be ready to code. So let's click on close right here. Let's enlarge this. So this is how PyCharm looks like. Now in order to create a file and start coding, you can go to the test, right click on it, click on new, and then Python file. Let's call it test.py. And it will let you code Python program right here. So you can simply just type print hello world and then go under run the program, run the test, and here it is, the output which says hello world. Now if you install PyCharm for the first time, these letters right here might be too small for you. Let's see how we can increase the font of these letters. So you can go on to the file, go to the settings. Under the settings you want to go to the editor, click on font, and under the font you can change whichever font you like. So let's say 22, click on OK, and the letters are now larger. So now that we got the PyCharm ready, in the next section we're going to start off with our first project, which is going to be a port scanner in Python 3. Okay, so that will be about it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and let's get straight into the hacking in the next section. Take care, bye! Hello everybody, and welcome to our first project where we are going to code our own port scanner using Python 3. So in the previous section we introduced ourselves to Kali Linux, we installed PyCharm, and now we are ready to start writing our code. Before we start, let's first explain what is the purpose of a port scanner, what it will do, and how are we going to create it. Well, first of all, a port scanner is a program that allows you to scan target machine and discover whether it has some open or closed ports. For example, we all know that the port 80 is used in order to serve HTTP and in order to serve a website page. Now, how would you actually discover whether port 80 is open without visiting that page? Well, using our port scanner, we can see whether we can connect to that port 80 or whether we cannot. If we can connect, that means that the port is open and it is most likely hosting a web page there. And if we cannot connect, that means that the port is closed. Simple as that. So that will be the baseline and the base part of our program. Now let's open a new project, and to do that we can go right here onto file and then new project. Here we can call it port scanner. Click on create. It will ask you whether you want to open the new project in this window or in another window. I will simply just select this window right here. It will create the virtual environment for this project, and then we can start coding. Now here it is, the port scanner. We will click on new and then Python file, and we will call it port scanner.py. Okay, Python file, we created it. Let me just enlarge a little bit more the font size. So once again to the editor, font, and right here let's go 24, apply, and now we are ready to go. Now for this project we're going to need two different Python libraries. We're going to need to import the socket library, and we're also going to need to import a library called IPY. And we're going to import it like this, from IPY, import IP. Now right away, you might notice that the IPY and IP are both red underlined. This means that the PyCharm cannot recognize this library and cannot find it. So before we actually start using it, we need to download it first. Now there are a few ways that we can actually download it. You can download it using a regular terminal, which we are going to do as a first try right here. So I will just put it like this so we can see everything. Now, in order to install a desired library using the terminal, you have to use a command called pip3 install. Now, pip3 is a part of Python 3 and it is used to actually install Python 3 libraries that are missing and that you need in order to run your program. Okay, now if you're using a new Kali Linux, you most likely won't have pip3 installed, and in order to install it, you simply just type apt install python3-pip. Press your enter and it will install it for you. For me, it is already been installed, so we can continue right away. Let me clear the screen, enlarge this a little bit, just in case you cannot see what I'm typing. And let's get the library that we're missing. So pip3 install IPY. Press your enter. And it will say requirement already satisfied. Now this might seem confusing because 2 minutes ago I just told you that we are missing this library, that we cannot find it. And here inside of a terminal it says that the requirement has already been satisfied and that we already have this library at this location. Well, that is another part of the PyCharm that you need to understand. PyCharm simply creates a virtual environment every time you create a new project. That means that the library that you have installed inside of your Kali Linux doesn't necessarily have to be installed inside of your PyCharm program. Therefore, this IPY library has not been installed inside of this virtual environment. So where can we install it? Well, you can go here on terminal and you will see right away that before the root Kali and then the actual directory, we have this VNV inside of brackets, which stands for virtual environment. So right here, if we type the same command, which is pip3 install, and then IPY, press your enter, you can see that right now it is successfully downloading it and it has downloaded it inside of our virtual environment. Right now, if we lower this, go right here, you can see that this is no longer red underlined and now we have both of our libraries ready to use. So I just wanted to show you that because it is really important and we will be switching between libraries throughout the entire course, so it is important for you to understand the meaning of a virtual environment. Therefore, once you next time try to install a desired library that is missing from PyCharm, don't use Kali Linux terminal like this. You simply just go down here and inside of this PyCharm project you can install the desired library inside of the virtual environment. So now that we imported the desired libraries, in the next video we can start finally coding our port scanner. See you there. Bye. Welcome back everybody. Let's continue with our port scanner. So what we did by now is we imported 2 libraries that we need in order for our program to work. Let's get straight into coding the main program. Okay, so first thing, let's think about it, what we need to logically do in order to discover whether a port is open or closed. Well, we need to establish a connection with the target machine, and then we need to try to connect to the specific port. If we manage to connect, the port is open. If we don't manage to connect, the port is closed. Now there is another thing that can happen, and that is that the port is filtered, but we are not going to cover that at the moment. So, first of all, let's see how we can establish the connection. Here is where we use the socket library. Socket library allows us to establish the connection over internet. So, how can we do that? Well, it's rather easy and it's something that we will use throughout this course a lot. It's a same scheme of few different lines of code that will allow us to connect to the target machine. So in the first line, we will define a socket descriptor. We do that by specifying the name and then equals socket.socket. Just like this, we define the socket descriptor, and you can name this anything you want. It doesn't have to be named sock, it can be named S, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to leave it on sock. As soon as we do that, we can try to connect to the target machine. So sock.connect, and inside of this connect function, we need to specify 2 open and 2 close brackets, and there we need to specify the IP address and the port that we want to connect to. Alright? Now you will see right away that once again this IP address and this port is underlined red. That means that this is not defined. So we need to define what IP address is and what port is. What we're going to do is we're simply just going to create a variable which will be called IP address, and we're going to set this variable to be equal to whatever the user of this program inputs during the running of the program. Now what I mean by that is we're going to use the input function, which allows us to at the runtime specify the IP address that we want to scan. So we're going to prompt to the user of this program something like this, enter target to scan. Okay. Now that we have that, we also need to define the port. And let's say the port will be port 80. It will be a simple integer, so we're going to select it like this. And now our code is good to go. All we are left to do is we are left to wrap this inside of a try and accept rule. And this try and accept rule basically means that we're going to try this, and in case that doesn't work, we're going to try something else, which will be under this accept part. So try and then sock.connect. We are trying to connect to the port, and if we don't manage to connect, we're going to print to the screen that the port is closed. And we can simply just specify port 80 is closed because we're scanning that port. If we do manage to connect, we can print port 80 is open. Okay, so this is the base part of the program. Let's see whether this works. Now, in order to test this and see whether it works, I'm going to pick a random IP address, which in this case will be the IP address of my laptop. And in your case, you can simply just scan any website on the internet. For example, let's say we go to Firefox and we can visit any website we want. Now keep in mind, once we actually manage to visit the website, that means that the port 80 is open because we are loading the web page. So let's go to this one. You can choose any you like. I'm going to scan this one. Okay, so let's copy this. This is the name of the website. Let's go right here inside of our terminal and let's try to run the program. Python 3 and then the name of the program, which in our case, it is Python 3 port scanner.py. It will ask us to enter the target to scan. Now you will notice if you specify like this, so we paste the name of the website and we click here enter, it will tell you that the port 80 is closed. Now why does it tell that? Is the port 80 really closed? Well, not really, since we actually managed to open it right here on our Firefox. Therefore something is wrong with our program. Well, we cannot really specify the link to the actual website, so how can we discover the IP address to this website? Well, we can use something called NSLookup. And we specify the actual link, press here enter, and what this will do, it says cannot find. Let's just try like this, without the HTTP, www, and then the name of the website. Okay, so here it is. Now we are able to retrieve the IP address to this specific website. What if we copy this IP address and go with this? So copy. And let's clear the screen and run our port scanner once again. Enter target to scan. We paste this. And now we get the correct result. It says port 80 is open. Okay? So for now on, what we did, we created two simple variables. One will host the IP address that we input during the running of the program, and the other one will host the port number 80. So we are not inputting this, we are not changing this. This will simply just stick to 80 for now. Then we try to connect, and if we manage to connect, we print that the port 80 is open. If we don't manage to connect, we print port 80 is closed. Okay, so good for now. We discovered that the port 80 is open on this specific website that we scanned. But this is not really what we want, right? We want to actually scan multiple targets. We want to scan all ports, or as many number of ports as we'd like. We want to print which port is open, which port is closed. And ideally, we also want to connect to that port and see which software is it running on that open port. Now that port scanner would be a really good one. So let's see in the next few videos how we can implement all of that. We would also like to change this program to also accept the links and not just the IP addresses. So you saw previously we couldn't really specify the link, it gave us the wrong result because it cannot really connect to a link inside of this program. But we also want to make sure that once the user of this program specifies a link such as www.google.com, it will also manage to discover open and closed ports. So we're going to see how we can perform all of that in the next few lectures. For now on, we created the base part and we are ready to continue coding on. Alright, so hope I see you in the next tutorial. Bye! Alright, welcome back. Let's continue with our port scanner. What we did by now, as you can see from the previous video, we only discovered that the port 80 is open on the website that we scanned. So what we need to do now is we need to wrap this code inside of a function. And let me show you why we are doing that. If I simply define a function which will be called scan_port, and for those of you who don't know, to define a function you simply just type def and then the function name. This function will take two parameters, which will be the IP address, which we defined at the beginning of the program, and it will also be the port. Okay, we specify two dots, and now we need to tab all of this code in so it can belong to the function that we created. Okay, so here it is. What this function will do is it will scan the port and it will define whether it is open or closed. Now, another thing that we want to do is we don't really want the port to be already predetermined. For example, let's say that the user of this program wants to scan port 22, which is the SSH port. Well, we want to allow them to actually do that, so we need to remove this port equals 80. And also from these comments right here, we want to type port, and then we're going to type it like this, plus string from the port. And the reason why we're using the string function onto this port variable is because the port variable will hold an integer value. Therefore, once we actually try to print it, we will get an error if we try to print an integer value. So we need to convert it first to string using this str function, and then we can print this. So for example, if the port is number 23, this will print port 23 is open. We also need to do the same right here. String from port. Okay, so port 23 is closed. And now let's test our function, but let's add a little bit of a twist to it. So what we want to do is we want to scan first 10 ports on our website. Alright, so how can we do that? Well, we don't have a port specified at all, so we need to iterate over numbers 1 through 10 and then specify for each number that the port is equal that exact number. Let me show you what I mean. So right here, if I go all the way down and below the function I specify for port in range 1 through 10, I want to perform a function scan underscore port on the IP address with the port number. So what this will do is it will go for port in range from 1 to 10. So first of all, port would be number 1. We want to scan the IP address with the port equal to 1. Then it will perform this task right here. Then it will go back, change the port variable to be equal to 2, and then it will perform the same task just with the port number equal to 2. Also what we want to do is we want to copy this. Copy, then we can delete it and we can paste it below the function right here. Okay, now let's see whether this works. So once again, for this, feel free to scan any website you want. I will simply just go with the same website that we used in the previous video. And once again, in order to discover the IP address of the link, we simply just type nslookup and then the link to the actual website. Copy the IP address, copy, and then let's run the program. Enter target to scan, we select the IP address, here it is. and now it is scanning first 10 ports. Now, right away you can notice that it's not really printing anything, it is actually going rather slow, and it is still not even finished with the first port. Now, we don't really want this, we want our port scanner to work faster, so how can we fix this? Well, first of all, Ctrl+C onto the program, right here, and then inside of our scan port function we need to add another line, which will be sock.set timeout, and we want to set the timeout to be equal to 0.5 seconds. Now, keep in mind also that the accuracy of the scan will depend on the length of the timeout. So some ports will take longer to connect to, and some ports will take less to connect to. If you simply just leave it without timeout, the accuracy will be the highest. The lower the timeout, the smaller the accuracy. But this is a price that we want to pay in order to actually scan the target faster. So let's see whether this worked. So Python 3 port scanner. We paste the IP address and we can see port 1 is closed and all of the 10 ports are closed on our website. So we scan ports 1 through 10. Okay, now this is probably correct for the website that I'm scanning, but how can we check that? Well, in the previous video I scanned the exact same website and I scanned the port 80. So how can I check whether this is working correctly? Well, instead of the range 1 through 10, I will simply just type 75 through 85. And most likely all of the ports will be closed except the port 80. So let's see how this works. Python 3 port scanner, paste the IP address, all the ports are closed and we have one port open and that is port 80. Okay, so our program seems to work really well. Okay, so we discovered that we need to set the timeout in order to actually scan ports faster. We lose the accuracy, but we gain on time. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how we can convert the link to an actual IP address. For example, we're going to take a look at how we can convert a link of a website to an IP address inside of our program. So whether the user of this program specifies a link or an IP address, this will still work. Okay, so I hope I see you in the next video and take care. Bye. Welcome back everyone. Let's continue with our port scanner. So what we did by now is we simply just created this function which allows us to scan the ports, and we also saw how we can use for loop in order to iterate over a certain amount of ports and scan each and every one of them. But right now let's see how we can implement a function that will allow the user of this program to specify the domain name as well as the IP address if they like. Well, here is where our IPY library comes in help. So you will notice that this is still gray, that means that we haven't used it inside of our code, and that will change now. So we'll simply just create a function up here which will be called, let's say, check_IP, and this function will take one parameter which we will specify inside of these brackets, and that parameter will be the IP address. Okay, now before we code any of this function we need to specify all the way down what we are going to provide to this function, and by that I mean which parameter are we going to send. Well, logically in our case we are going to send the IP address parameter. Keep in mind that this IP address variable doesn't have to store the IP address, it can also store the domain name. So what we need to do is we need to simply just, after the user specifies the target, we'll simply just call the function check_IP and we will paste the IP address inside of that function. Then we're going to store all of this inside of a converted _IP. And you will see in just a second why we are doing this. So right here we're going to scan the converted IP address and the port number. Okay, so let's code the function above. So obviously we need to use this library right here, and this actual library comes with a specific function which is simply called IP function. Okay, so if I go to my Google Chrome, and I have a page opened right here, which is basically the documentation of the IPY library. We can see that they use right here this IP function in order to convert an IP address to the IP format. So in order for our function to work, we need to specify inside of the brackets the IP address, which is the parameter of our function. If it manages to convert the IP address, that means that this worked successfully and that the user actually specified the actual IP address to the target. If it gets a value error, that means that the user specified the domain name. So let's write that right here, and in case you don't understand, we're going to test this, so don't worry. We're going to try to convert the IP address, and if it manages, we're going to return simply what we sent to the function, which is the IP. And in case it doesn't work, we are going to get the value error, which means that the user most likely specified the domain name. And therefore we're going to return a function which belongs to the socket library, which allows us to convert the actual host name to the IP address. So all we need to do is specify that function and call it upon our IP address, and we can do that by simply specifying return socket.getHostByName. And here we specify the host name, or in our case the IP, which we pasted to our function. Okay, so this is our entire function. Now let's see inside of a terminal, and let's open up our Python 3, and here we can import IP. Oops, let me just do it like this. First of all, I will enlarge this so we can see it better. Open Python 3, import or from IPY, import IP. And now let's say we have a variable called IP address, and it will be 192.168.1.1. Okay? And now if I simply just call converted IP equals IP from IP address, and I print the converted IP, you will see it will still be the same IP address. So it really didn't change anything. Therefore, right here, if it manages to do that, we're simply just returning the IP address that we pasted inside of this function. And we are not making any changes to it. But that is only the case if the user specifies the IP address. If the user specifies the domain name, so let's create a variable called domain name equals, and then let's say google.com, and we try the same thing, so converted IP equals IP from the domain name, and you will see we will get an error, and it will be the value error. So that is the case right here. Then we are going to perform the getHostByName, which will retrieve the IP address of the google.com, and then we will return the IP address inside of our scan port function. So that is all there is for this function. Now let's see whether this works. Okay, so let's run the program, Python 3, and then port scanner. Enter target to scan. Let's say we enter, let's say the same website as before. Let's not change it right now. And instead of the IP address, we now enter the domain name. We're going to leave this to run. And here we can see that it works successfully, as it did manage to find the port 80 open. We will get the same result even if we scanned with an IP address. So right now we can specify both the domain name and IP address. So that is good. Now in the next video we're going to take a look at how we can specify multiple targets and scan multiple targets at once. So we don't have to run our program over and over again. We can do the same thing just by specifying multiple targets inside of our program, and it will scan them one by one. So we're going to take a look at that in the next tutorial. Hope you enjoyed this small lecture, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Welcome back everybody, and let's continue with our port scanner. So we managed to create a function that will convert the domain name into an IP address, and now we want to be able to specify multiple targets for our program to scan. Okay, so how we can do that? Well, it is rather easy. We're going to implement a little bit of changes down here at the bottom of our program. So here you will notice that we have the variable called IP address. Now it says enter target to scan. Well, we can simply just do something like this, and specify to the user of this program that they can also enter multiple targets by typing target/s. And also we're going to specify to the user split multiple targets with comma. Okay, so simple as that. Let us make this a little bit better. But this is just the part where we prompt the user how they can specify multiple targets. Now we need to actually split these targets and scan each one of them one by one. So how can we do that? Well, first thing we're going to do is, so we don't get confused, we are going to rename this into targets variable. And then what we're going to do, we're going to delete this line for now. And we're going to specify if and then comma in targets. If there is comma in targets, logically that means that the user of this program specified multiple targets to scan. If there is not comma inside of the targets variable, that means that the user only specified one target to scan. So we're going to lead by that logic. So if comma is in targets, then for IP address, and we're going to call it simply just IP_add in targets, and we're going to call the function called split. And what this function does is basically it will split the string with the character that we specify inside of the brackets. So we want to split at every comma. If we split at every comma, that means we're going to split all of the IP addresses one by one. Therefore, we're specifying right here for IP address in targets.split, we want to scan each and every IP address. So scan port IP address, and then so we want to scan each and every target from this list, and in order to do that we're going to create a function which is going to be called scan. Now I know we do have a scan port function, but we're going to use this function in order to scan one single port one by one. And we're going to call this scan function in order to scan each and every target and also convert the domain name into an IP address if needed. So all that this function will take as a parameter will be the IP address, which we get from this for loop right here. Okay? We also want to strip it from any unnecessary empty spaces, in case there are some. And right now all we need to do is code this function. Let's go all the way up and call the scan function onto the target. So this will be one single target. And first we need to do is to get back the line that we deleted before, which is the conversion of the IP address. So converted underscore IP will be equal to check IP, which is our function that we coded in the previous lecture. And we need to check the IP address from the target, which is our parameter inside of the function. Okay, and now we will print, just so we know what we're doing. We're going to print, first of all, new line character, which is \n plus, and let's make some type of a smiley right here, which will look something like this. So, and let's print scanning target. We also want to specify which target are we scanning in case there are multiple ones. So we'll specify the string of the target, which will be either the domain name or the IP address. If we specify plus the string of the converted IP, it will only specify the IP address since it will already be converted from the domain name. But we don't want that. We want to specify plus the string of target, which will be the names that the user specified to the program. And then we need to copy this part from below, which is for port in range. Scan each and every port. Let's copy this. We no longer need it right here. We can delete it from here. And we can move it inside of our scan function. So right here. Let me just tab this properly, and we're going to change a few things if we need. So for port in range 75 to 85, we can change that right away, for example, from port 1 to port 100, and you can keep this number as low or as high as you want. Just for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to leave it on only scanning 100 ports, since most of the ports that we want to see whether they're open or closed will be in the first 100 ports, okay? And then we will call the scan port function onto the port number and also onto the converted IP, which we converted in the first line of our function. Okay, so everything makes sense. Now, another thing that we need to change down here, since we specified if comma in targets, that means that the actual user specified multiple targets to scan, but what if they specify only one target? Well then, nothing of this will get executed and we will not really scan any target throughout our program, it will simply just exit the program without scanning the target. So we need to add an else statement right here. So if comma in targets, else, we want to scan the targets. Simple as that, because in this case, the targets will be just one IP address or one domain name. Then it will jump from that function to the scan function, which will convert that IP address, and it will perform the scan port function onto the first 100 ports. Okay, so everything makes sense. Now let's see whether we have an error inside of our program or if everything works perfectly. Okay, so let's see how we can run it. Let's open up our terminal and navigate. And first I will enlarge this so we can see everything. And we need to navigate to our PyCharm directory. It will usually be in the /root directory. So here it is, PyCharm projects. I will cd to that directory, type ls. We have the test directory, which we created once we installed the PyCharm, and we have our port scanner directory, or our port scanner project. So let's change the directory to the port scanner, type ls once again, and here is our port scanner.py. I will clear the screen and I will run the program. First of all, let's try it with one target. So let's switch it up a little bit. I will use my actual router IP address in order to perform the test of this program. So I will type 192.168.1.1. Press here enter and you will see it will perform the scan really fast because my router is close to me. Therefore, we can see most of the ports are closed. We have the port 22 open, port 23 open. Let's see which ones are also open. Port 53 open for the DNS and port 80 open. All the other ports are closed, okay? So, right away, we can notice that this is not really that good to look at. We don't really want to print the closed ports as there is too much happening right here, especially if you scan more than 100 ports, it will be really hard to find all of the open ones. So let's see what we can do inside of our program in order to print only the open ports. Okay, so right here, whoops, need to go right here inside our code. And in the scan port function is our print statements for the port open and port closed. So what we can do is instead of printing port is closed, we can delete this. And we can simply specify pass. Now what this will do is it will not perform anything, it will not print any statement, it will simply just pass in case the port is closed. Okay, simple as that. Let's test it once again. Python 3 port scanner.py, specify the IP address of my router once again, and this is a lot better. We can see scanning target and then the actual IP address of my router and then which ports are open. And it is the exact same 4 ports that we saw before. Let's try another target. Let's specify actually 2 targets now. If I run the program, and for this test you can specify the same target as I will, which will be an actual domain name, which is called testphp.vulnweb.com. Okay, so let's specify this target, and also you can specify any other random IP address or domain name if you want. In this case I will specify once again my router, so we have a mixture of the domain name and the IP address, so we can see whether this will work properly. If I press enter, it will first start off with this domain name right here, and it will scan for the open ports, and then it will proceed to the IP address of my router and scan the open ports for that router as well. So we can see on the first link it found 4 ports open, port 21, 22, 53 and 80, and on my router the same 4 ports as before. So our program works correctly. We're almost close to finishing our program, but there is one more thing that we actually want to do. We want to also print which service is running on an open port. For example, let's say we want to discover whether port 80 is running Apache 2 or some other version of a web server. Well, we can do that by simply grabbing the banner on an open port. And more about that in the next lecture. For now on, we are glad that we can scan multiple targets, whether they are specified as a domain name or as an IP address. We can split them by comma. We can also scan one target if we want, and we also print only open ports as we are not really interested in the closed ports. Okay, so thank you for watching this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Welcome back everybody, and let's finally finish our port scanner. As I mentioned in the previous video, we're only left to do one small thing before our port scanner is complete and ready to use. And that is to perform the banner grabbing on the open ports to discover which services and which softwares are running on those open ports, which can give us even more detail and information in our future attack. Okay, so what we need to do is, let's first of all think how we can actually grab the banner from an open port. Well, logically, we need to connect to that port, we need to try to receive something from that open port, and then read that information that we received from that port. So we already performed half of that job. We connect to that port right here at this line. So all we're left to do after it is check whether that port retrieves some information or sends some information back to us once we connect. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, right after the connect function, we can try to retrieve the information. We're going to use a specific function to do that, and we will store the result of that function inside of a variable which we will name banner. So banner will be equal to the function which will be called getBanner, and that function will take as a parameter the socket object. So we're pasting our socket object inside of this function so we can use it inside of it, and then we will retrieve the actual banner if we manage to get it to the banner variable. Alright, so let's first of all code that function. We can do it right here between the scan port and check IP function, and we will call it, as we already said, getBanner. This function will take the socket object as a parameter which we already pasted inside of our scan port function, and all we need to return from this is we need to return the socket object and then .receive, which is the function that receives the data from this open port. We can also specify inside of the brackets which amount of bytes we want to receive, and usually this number is specified as 1024 bytes, as we don't really need more in order to get and print the banner. Okay, so this is the entire function, the entire getBanner function. Now we need to perform some modifications right here inside of our program. So we have the function right here, and we try right here to store the banner inside of this variable. Okay, now if we do manage to store it, we're going to print port, and then the string of the port is open. But let's change it up so it looks a little bit better. So we're going to delete all of this and print the exact same thing, just with the banner attached. So we're going to print something like this. Let's add the plus sign, which means that the port is open. So open port, and then space. We will add the string of the port number that we are scanning. So plus the string of port. And then the next thing we want to do is plus, and we want to add the banner. Let's separate it with 2 dots, and then add or concat the string from the banner to our open port number. So we are going to leave it like this. Let me just see. Another thing that we need to add is another except statement right here. So except, in case we cannot get the banner, we're only going to print open port, and we're not going to print any type of banner as we didn't really manage to retrieve it. So open port plus the string of port, and that is all we need to do right here. Now let's see whether this will work. If we open the terminal right here enlarge the letters so we can see everything, and navigate to PyCharm projects and then port scanner. Then we try to run the port scanner and specify the same two websites as in the previous video, so testphp.oneweb.com. Let's first of all try with this one. It will scan the target, and we can see right here we do manage to retrieve some of the banners from two different open ports. So here it is, we got a banner for the open port 21, and now we know that the version of the software running on the open port 21, which is the FTP port, is ProFTPD 1.3.3e server. And what we can do with this information, we can simply just copy this, paste it inside of a Google, and see whether there is any type of exploit for this specific version of the FTP server. We can also perform the same thing for the SSH, which is on port 22. We see that the version is SSH 2.1, OpenSSH 5.3 P1 Debian Ubuntu. Then we can copy this and try to find it on Google try to find some vulnerabilities for this version on Google. Simple as that. But let's make our actual output a little bit prettier. We don't really want it to print this B and then the apostrophe, and we also don't want it to print the /r or the \r\n, which simply just stand for the new line character. Okay, so let's see how we can get rid of that. Well, in the part where we are printing the banner, if we take a look at our output, we can see that the banner output starts with B and then apostrophe. That is because we haven't really decoded our banner. Once it actually receives the message or receives these 1024 bytes, those 1024 bytes will be encoded by default. In order for us to remove that B and the apostrophe, we can simply just type banner.decode, which is a function which will remove that, and we also want to strip the new line character. So how we can do that? Well, we can add another function to this banner, which is .strip, and right here we can specify \n. For example, let's see whether this worked. If I go right here and type same website, testphp.oneweb.com. Here it is. Now we got the prettier output. If you compare this one with this one, you will notice we no longer get this B apostrophe and this \r and \n. Alright, so great. Our port scanner works. Let's also test it to see whether it works on multiple targets. So I will clear the screen, run my port scanner, specify, for example, 3 targets, which one of them will be this one, which we used in the first lectures of our port scanner. Then we can use the IP address of my router, and then we can use the same testphp.oneweb.com. It will go and scan one by one. First of all, it will start with this IP address right here. If it manages to find open ports, it will print them out. If it also manages to grab the banner, it will also print that out. It will also print the banner out as well next to the open port. Then it will proceed to the next 2 targets and perform the exact same task on both of them. Now you might notice that some targets will go slower in scanning and some targets will go faster, and that is pretty much normal. Keep in mind that this part right here, which is the socket.setTimeout, is crucial in order to get more or less accurate scan. If we simply just remove this line, then some actual targets might be scanning for hours depending on the distance and the open ports that they have and also the services that they are running. Sometimes it might take longer to connect to those ports and so on and so on. Therefore, it is always good to set a timeout so you don't have to wait an entire day for your scan to finish. But by lowering this timeout, you will also lose the accuracy of your scan. For example, let's say we have a port that takes 1 second to connect to, and you set the timeout 0.5 seconds. Well then, after 0.5 seconds, it will determine that this port is closed even though it is not, it just takes longer to connect to. Therefore, you will lose the accuracy and you will not know that that port is open. So this part right here, which is the timeout, is completely up to you. You can change it to whichever time you want. Let's go back to our scan and we can see all 3 scans have finished. On the first target, we only found 1 open port. We didn't manage to retrieve any banner for it. on my router we found 4 open ports, and port 22 sent the banner back to us, and now we know which version of software it is running. And the target number 3 we already scanned, and we got the exact same result. Okay, so our port scanner is complete. It can scan multiple targets, it retrieves the banners, and now we are ready to use it for our penetration testing. Okay, so in the next video we're going to go really fast over this code so we can explain it once again for those of you that have some inconvenience, or if there is something that you do not understand, I will simply just go fast through that code, and then we're going to see how we can also import our port scanner into another Python program if we want to. After that video we're going to proceed to our next project. Okay, so thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Welcome back everyone, and this is the last video to our port scanner project. Right now what we're going to do is we're going to first of all recap what we did inside of this program. So we're just going to go through the program code real fast and explain what everything is doing once again. And then I will show you how you can use this program and import it inside of another program so you can use it. Alright, so first of all, let's navigate all the way down to the beginning of the program. Here, as you can see, we prompt the user to input a target or multiple targets. We then check whether they specified one target or multiple targets. If we find comma inside of this variable, that means they specified multiple targets. Therefore, we will split all of those targets, and for each and every IP address inside of this variable, we will perform the scanning of that IP address. In any other case, that means if we didn't find comma, that means they only specified one target. Therefore, we're going to perform the scan function onto the targets variable, as it is only storing one IP address or one domain name. Okay? Then once we navigate to the scan function, here we first take the converted IP variable, and then we perform the check IP function onto the specified target. If the specified target is simply IP address, we will return that IP address, and it will be stored inside of the converted IP. In case the target is an actual domain name, therefore we're going to perform this socketGetHostByName method, which allows us to convert the domain name into an IP address. Okay? Right after we convert the IP address, we scan for 100 ports. Now this number, keep in mind, can be changed. For example, you can scan for first 500 ports if you'd like. It doesn't have to be 100. This is a number that you can change. Now another thing that you might want to implement in this program if you want, is you can also prompt the user for how many ports they want to scan. How we would do that? Well, we will simply do that by specifying something like this. You go to the beginning of the program, and there you can simply type port num. Let's say we call the variable like that, and then input, enter number of ports that you want to scan. Then the user would enter the number of ports. Oops, let's not leave this to be capital. Let's leave it like this. So enter number of ports that you want to scan. Then you would take this actual variable and you will also paste it into the scan function. Once you do that, if you go back to the scan function, right here, you would simply have something like port num as a parameter, and then you would have for port in range 1 through port num. So you wouldn't have 500, you would have something like port num. So simple as that. But we're not going to leave it like this. Let's just leave it as the way it was before. This is just something that you can implement and leave it in the program if you want. In this case, we are not going to use that since it is not necessary. We simply just always want to scan for first 500 ports. So I will delete this. Also keep in mind, if you leave that option, you also need to specify the port number inside of this line right here, and also inside of this line right here as a second parameter to the function. Okay? So once we get to this for loop, we scan for each and every port between the range of 1 and 500, and we do that by using the scan port function. So let's go to the scan port function, and this is the main part of the program. Here we create the socket object, we set the timeout so we don't actually waste too much of our time trying to figure out whether a port is closed or open. Keep in mind that the accuracy of the scan will depend on the amount of the timeout that you set. the lower the timeout, the lesser the accuracy, the higher the timeout, the bigger the accuracy. Okay, so then we perform the connect function onto the target IP address and the port number. Right after it, if we manage to connect, we will simply just try to get banner and figure out which software is the target running on that specific open port. If we don't manage to get the banner, we will simply just print open port without the banner, and if we do manage to get it, we will print open port, then the port number, and we will attach the banner right after the two dots. Okay? In any other case, if we don't manage to connect, we will simply just pass and not print anything, because we are not really interested in printing which ports are closed. We're only interested in printing the open ports. Okay? So this is basically the whole idea of this port scanner project, and now let's see how we can actually use this program and import it into another program. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, first of all, what we need to do is we need to create another file. So I'm just going to go right click on the port scanner, then go to the new and then Python file, and let's call this file ipscan.py. It will automatically add it right here. So you will have two tabs, one for the port scanner and one for the IP scan. And now we want to import this program. Now, one thing before you actually do that is you need to make sure that both of these files are in the same directory. In my case, they are both in the port scanner project, therefore they are in the same directory, so I can proceed. Now, the next thing that we need to take a look at is the name of our port scanner, so it is named portscanner.py. Now, in order to actually import this file into another file in the same directory, we simply just type the command import and then the name of the program that we want to import. In our case, it is port scanner. So let's type it right here, port scanner, and you will see that PyCharm already recognizes it. Therefore, we successfully managed to import our port scanner program. Now, how can we perform the same task that we did right here, just without typing all of this code? Well, we can simply just call these functions from our second program and use them independently. Okay, so the use of this importing is basically if anyone else wants to use our port scanner, they can simply just import it and use the functions from that program into their own program. So what we're going to specify right here first is the IP address to, for example, be testphp.oneweb.com. This is the domain name that we used to test with our port scanner before, so nothing new right here. And all we need to do to actually run this port scanner inside of a different program is to call the scan function. Now, at first you might be asking, well, why are we calling the scan function? Well, basically you will notice that by calling this scan function, all of the other functions get called as well. For example, inside of the scan function, we first call the check IP function in order to check for the IP address. Then we call the scan port function, which will scan each and every port that we specify inside of this for loop. And inside of the scan port function, the get banner function gets called in order to print the banner. So we don't need to call specifically all of these functions. We can simply just call the scan function. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, in order to call a function from a different program, we first of all need to specify the program name. Just the same way that you would specify a method from a different library. For example, right here, we used socket library and we called a method or a function, and we called a function from that specific library, but before we had to specify the library name. Same way goes here. We first need to specify port scanner and then dot and then scan. You remember that the scan function takes one argument, which will be the target, as the PyCharm already tells us right here, and our target will be the IP address. And believe it or not, but this is the entire program. Just by using these 3 lines, we can perform the same thing that we did inside of our port scanner project. So this is the power of importing libraries. You can see that anyone who wants to use this can simply just write 3 lines and they will perform the same task that we performed by coding the entire port scanner. But there is another thing that we need to take a look at before we actually try to run the IP scan. You might notice this part right here. Well, we don't really want to run this since, first of all, we are calling this scan function already inside of our IP scan program, therefore we don't really want to call it twice. And we would actually call it because by importing the port scanner into our IP scan, we're also calling this part of the code. Importing a library simply means that we're going to paste the entire port scanner code into our IP scan function. Therefore, this part of the code will also get ran. So how can we make sure that this part of the code doesn't get ran? Well, simply we can type if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals equals and then open double quotes underscore underscore main underscore underscore. If this is equal to main, then we're going to run this part of code. So let's tab all of these lines in, so they belong to this if statement. And now this part of program will only get ran if we run the port scanner. This line basically means that the actual Python will recognize whether this program is being ran as a main program or it is being imported into a different program and ran from there. In case it is being imported in a different program, like in this case right here, then it will not run this part of the code. If it is not imported into a different program, and if we simply just try to run the port scanner itself, then this part of the code will actually run. And that is the meaning of this line right here. You can simply just remember this as if this is the main program, then run this part of the code. Okay, so right now let's test our ipscan.py. Let's open the terminal and let's type python 3 ipscan.py. You can see it is scanning the target. It already found the 2 ports open, and it will scan for first 500 ports as we specified and change the number from 100 to 500. You can see we are also getting some banners from these open ports. We got open port 106, open port 110, 143. We can see here is a long banner from that port. Not really sure what this is. We also discover another open port, which is port 465, and therefore our program closes as it reached the 500 ports number. Okay, so it actually does work. Now another thing that you should keep in mind is that you will need to actually code this part of the code into this IP scan because, for example, if a user specifies comma and then an IP address, this will not work because we do not have this part and this if statement right here. Therefore, it will not be able to scan because of this comma right here. So if you want to be able to scan multiple targets from your IP scan program, make sure that you implement this if statement into the IP scan. But we're not going to do that at the moment. There is no need for that. We already did that in the port scanner program, and I will leave that up to you. Okay, so with this, we actually finish our first project, which will be the port scanner. And in the next project, we're going to take a look at how we can create the vulnerability scanner, which will be based on this port scanner that we just created. So make sure not to delete this program as we're going to need it. You also know that you will have all of these actual programs in the resources at the end of each project. Okay, so you can simply just download them if you don't want to code them. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you in the vulnerability scanner project. Take care and bye. Welcome everybody to our second project of this course, which would be a vulnerability scanner. Alright, so what we did by now is we created our port scanner, which managed to scan multiple targets as well as one target, and also discover which ports were open and closed, and we also managed to discover some of the softwares running on those open ports. Alright, right now we want to advance our game and create a vulnerability scanner which will be able to detect which of those softwares are potentially vulnerable to some type of the attack. So there are a few approaches that we can do in order to create this. I picked one which is going to be based on our port scanner, meaning that we are first going to import our port scanner, we're going to scan for the open ports, then we're going to create a list of vulnerable softwares in a txt file, which then we're going to also import into our program, and then we're going to compare the softwares on the open ports with the softwares named in the list or in our txt file, and if they do match, that means that we discovered a vulnerable software which can be exploited. Alright? Now you can actually download some of these vulnerable softwares list over the internet, Or for the purposes of this tutorial, you can simply just create a small list of a few softwares like I will in order to test our program. But before we do any of that, let us open up our PyCharm and create our new project. Alright, so I will open up my PyCharm by going here and typing PyCharm. Here it is, it loaded fully, and by default it will open up our previous project, which will be the port scanner project, but we do not want to continue coding inside of that project. We want to create a new one, and then we are going to copy paste the port scanner into that new project. Alright, so let's wait for it to reopen all of the files from the port scanner project. Okay, so here it is. Now, let's go onto the file right here, click on the new project. Under the create new project, in the location, we can create a name for our new project, which would be vulnerability, or let's just type vuln scanner. It doesn't really matter. You can call it anything you want, and then click on create. It will ask you whether you want to open the project inside of this window or whether you want to create a new window for it. We can simply just create this window, and it will open up the new project that we just created. Alright, so here it is, it's creating all the dependencies needed. And right now what we're going to do, we're going to open up our terminal. We're going to navigate to our port scanner project using our terminal, and then we'll copy our port scanner to the vulnerability scanner. Right, so let's go to the PyCharm projects. If I type ls, here are both of these. Then we want to navigate to the port scanner, type ls once again, and we want to copy the port scanner.py into the vulnerability scanner directory. Alright, so cp port scanner.py to the root, PyCharm, and then vulnerability scanner. Press enter, and in just a few seconds we should see our port scanner right here. Okay, so here it is. Let's open it up. And here is our program. Now, as I mentioned previously, we're going to base our vulnerability scanner onto this port scanner right here, but we're not going to code it right in this program. We're simply going to import our port scanner, as I showed you in the previous video how you can do that, and we're going to perform some small modifications to this program right here. For example, we want to make this program a class. So we're going to delete some of the functions right here, we're going to modify this part of the program, and we're going to create this to be one giant class, alright? But more about that in the next tutorial. For now on, we just simply copy this, we created our new project, and in the next video we're ready to start coding our vulnerability scanner, alright? So, see you there and take care. Bye. Welcome back everybody. So for now we haven't really done anything yet, but we did import our port scanner, and now we are ready to start coding the main part of the program. So let's go to the vulnerability scanner right here, right click on it, click on the new, and click on Python file. So all of this stuff we already learned, we know how to do it, and let's create a program which will be called vulscan.py. Now first thing that we want to do is of course to import our port scanner, which makes sure that it is in the same directory. That is important, and that is actually going to be the only library that we are going to need, since these two libraries, which are going to be the socket library and the IPY library, are already imported inside of this port scanner program. Alright, now you might notice once again that this IPY is actually red underlined, which means that this library does not exist inside of this virtual environment, and